I'm only asking for a glass of milk, sir. The voice was so small it barely carried through the heavy oak door, but Marcus Castellano heard it. He heard it the way a man hears a wrong note in a familiar song instantly, and with a quiet alarm he could not yet name. He had been sitting in the ground-floor study of his gray stone mansion in Bay Ridge for nearly 4 hours. The clock on the mantel had crossed 11. Spread across the leather desk were 2 ledgers, one clean and printed, the other handwritten in his own slanted script, the numbers that existed on no tax form in the state of New York. Outside, snow fell in slow sheets across the wrought iron fence, and the cameras blinking their red eyes along the driveway. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, the sound a child made when the child had already practiced being invisible. Frank Doyle rose from his chair, one hand sliding toward his holster. "I'll get it, boss." Marcus lifted 2 fingers off the page. "No, I will." Frankie sat back down. 15 years standing behind the Castellanos had taught him exactly when not to ask. Marcus crossed the marble foyer and pulled the door halfway open. A little girl stood on the porch. She could not have been more than 6. Her brown hair was tangled, half fallen from a ponytail. Her coat was thin and 2 sizes too large, the shoulders soaked through. Her lips were a dim shade of violet. She held a baby boy against her chest with both arms locked under him, the way someone carries a thing they cannot afford to drop. The boy did not look up. His face was pressed into the curve of her neck, quiet in the particular, frightening way of a child who had been hungry too long to make noise about it. She trembled once, all the way through. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir." Her voice cracked. "I just need a glass of milk for my little brother. Half a glass is okay, too." Marcus did not answer. He looked past her, into the dark. No adult on the steps, no car at the curb, only the snow, the black iron fence, and the polished sign just under the porch lamp. "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." She had walked past that sign to knock on his door. "Where are your parents?" he asked, lower than he meant to. She shook her head. Snow dropped from her hair. "I live with my sister Sarah and my grandma." "Grandma's in the hospital, sir. She got sick." Footsteps behind him, silk slippers on marble. Marcus. He did not turn. He knew the voice. Vivian Ashford descended the staircase in a champagne silk robe, one hand sliding along the banister. Her face wore the careful, schooled displeasure of a woman taught young that visible anger was for women without breeding. "Marcus," she said again, cooler now, "you cannot let every stray child in this neighborhood knock on your door. This is Castellano territory. Do you understand what that means?" Frankie stepped quietly into the foyer and leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, watching the floor. The boss did not like to be spoken over, especially not inside his own house. Frankie's job, in this minute, was to be furniture. The girl flinched at Vivian's voice, half a step back, and her heel caught on ice. She steadied herself, but her grip on the baby tightened. Marcus looked at her shoes. Canvas, the left sole peeling away from the cloth, snow packed into the tier. He looked at her shoulders, white with it. She had been walking a long time. The baby's hand had fallen open against her collar, fingers curled like a question. Marcus Castellano lowered himself onto one knee on the cold stone of the porch and brought his eyes level with hers. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Her mouth opened. Her lip shook. She drew a small breath to say it. And from behind him, Vivian's voice cut clean across the porch like a blade laid flat against bone. "Don't encourage her." Vivian stepped down off the last stair with her arms folded across her chest, her voice cool and clean as glass. "I've seen this trick before, Marcus. The hungry child act. They send them to scout the rich houses, see who answers, see how soft the man at the door is." The little girl pressed back against the porch rail. She tightened her grip on the baby until the small body shifted against her collarbone. "I'm not a thief, ma'am," she whispered. "I promise." Marcus did not move from where he was kneeling. He kept his eyes on the girl's face, but he tilted his head a quarter inch toward Vivian. It was the only sign that he was listening. Vivian stepped closer and lowered her voice. She switched to Italian, the way she did when she wanted a conversation no one else could carry away. "Did you forget last week? The Genovese sent a child like this to the Marino house. The next night there was a bomb under the man's car. This is security, Marcus, not sentiment." She did not stop there. She rarely did, when she felt she had the floor. "And think of how this looks. The future Signora Castellano standing on the porch while her husband hands soup to street children. They'll laugh in every dining room from here to Staten Island. You cannot be soft to outsiders. Amor, charity is a game for the lower classes." Marcus did not answer. He let her finish. He always let her finish. It was a habit older than this engagement, older than his title. His father had taught him that a real Don listens through the whole sentence even when he has already decided. Promise nothing while another mouth is still moving. He looked at the girl on the porch and let his thoughts run quietly underneath Vivienne's words. 5 years ago, his father, on his deathbed, had pressed a folded paper into Marcus's hand and made him swear to honor it. The paper was an arrangement with the Ashfords, an alliance between 2 old Sicilian houses, sealed with a daughter. Marcus had kept it 5 years out of respect for a dying man. He had not signed it. He had watched Vivienne in those 5 years. He had watched her smile at waiters who could not refuse her, and he had watched her smile at men whose wives were across the room. He had once watched her slap a housemaid hard enough to split the girl's lip because a glass of red wine had touched the hem of a white dress. The girl had apologized. Vivienne had not. That was the night Marcus understood that the woman his father had chosen for him had a smile like a slave trader's. His own family did its share of ugly things. Marcus had inherited that, but he had drawn lines his father never drew. No narcotics, no women, no children. Some of the older capos still laughed at him for it behind closed doors. He let them laugh. He slept easier than they did. Vivienne was watching him now, waiting for the agreement she always assumed was coming. He did not give it. The little girl had taken his silence for a verdict. She lowered her head, and her shoulders curled in around her brother, as if to make herself smaller, easier to forgive. "I'm sorry," she said, very softly. "I'll go. I didn't mean to be a bother." She turned. Her first step was into the snow. Her second step found the patch of frozen porch where the heater under the eaves had thawed and refrozen the slush into glass. Her foot slid out from under her. Marcus moved without thinking. His hand closed around her shoulder before she fell, and through the thin coat, he felt the small ridge of bone there, sharp and unprotected, no flesh between her skin and the cloth. The bone of a child who had been splitting her food for someone else for a long time. He did not let go right away. The baby on her chest stirred, his eyelids fluttered, lifted, and his small dark eyes found Marcus's face from a few inches away. He made a sound. Not a wail. A thin, dry note in the back of his throat, the cry of a child too hungry to cry properly, the cry that had given up on being heard. Marcus felt that sound land somewhere in his chest he had not known was still soft. He stood up slowly, keeping one hand at the girl's back, so she would not slip again. He did not look at Vivienne. He did not need to. He turned his head just far enough to find Frankie still standing in the foyer, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. "Frankie?" His voice was low. It did not rise. It did not have to. Inside. All of them. The kitchen was a long, soft-lit room of white marble and warm brass, the kind of room designed to make wealth look casual. Pendant lamps hung over a center island the size of a dining table. The floor was polished, pale stone, every seam invisible. Somewhere along one wall, a refrigerator the size of a closet hummed quietly to itself. Into all of that, Marcus walked the little girl and her brother. She stopped just inside the doorway. He felt her hesitate at his side and looked down. She was staring at the floor. "You can come in," he said. She nodded once but did not step forward. Instead, she eased herself sideways against the edge of the kitchen island, very carefully, and stood there with both arms still locked around the baby. She kept her ruined canvas shoes pressed close together, as if making them smaller might keep the snow on them from melting onto the white stone. Marcus did not point this out. There were forms of dignity that became smaller when they were named. He went to the refrigerator himself. Behind him, he heard Frankie shift his weight against the doorframe. A small, surprised shift. The Don of the Castellano family did not pour his own water in his own house. The Don had people for that. The Don had always had people for that. Marcus took out the carton of milk, set a copper saucepan on the burner, and turned the gas on. He moved like a man who had watched cooks do this 1,000 times and never done it himself, which was exactly what he was. The flame caught too high. He turned it down. Vivienne climbed onto one of the high stools at the far end of the island and crossed her legs. Her silk slippers swung once. She tapped her fingernails against the marble in a slow, even rhythm. "Marcus," she said, "I'll have one of the boys drive them down to the precinct on 4th. Family services can take it from there. Let me handle this." He did not turn around. "It's not necessary. Go to bed, Vivienne. It's late." The tapping stopped. He heard the silk of her robe move as she stood. He heard her draw breath to say something else, then choose, with great care, not to. She offered the room a small, polished smile that no one was looking at, and crossed the foyer toward the staircase. The slippers made no sound on the marble until she was almost out of earshot. Then they made just enough. Marcus poured the warmed milk into a white porcelain cup and slid it across the island. The girl caught it with both hands. She did not lift it to drink. She turned the cup once, set the back of her hand against the side, held it there a moment, then turned the cup again and tested the other side. Only when she was satisfied did she bring the rim to her brother's mouth. The baby's small hands came up and clamped around the cup over hers. His eyelids fluttered. He drank in tiny, exhausted swallows. Marcus watched. "And you?" he said. The girl shook her head without looking up. "I'm okay with water, sir. Grandma says don't take more than you need." Marcus went back to the refrigerator. He took out a container of chicken soup the housekeeper had left in glass, half a loaf of bread, and an apple. He set the soup on the stove. He did not ask again whether she wanted any. He simply moved another bowl onto the island in front of her. While the soup warmed, he kept his voice low and even, the way a man speaks to something he does not want to startle. "How did you find this house, sweetheart?" She glanced up. "I knocked at a lot of houses, sir. Tell me, the one with the bell that talks." A man's voice said, "Go away. There's cameras." Her thumb stroked the back of her brother's hand on the cup. "The one with the white fence." A lady looked through the window, then closed the curtain and turned off her light. "The last house on the corner has a dog that comes to the door." She paused, like a person trying to be fair. "But your house," she said, "had a black cat sitting in the window." Marcus stilled. "The cat wasn't scared of me," the girl said. "I thought, anybody who has a cat that isn't scared of children probably won't chase a kid away." In the doorway, Frankie pressed his lips together and looked down at his shoes. Every man in the Castellano family knew about Lucia. 3 years ago, Marcus had stopped his car in the rain on the Belt Parkway shoulder for a half-drowned black kitten the size of his fist. The capos still teased him about it when they were drunk enough. Marcus did not answer her. He set the bowl of soup down in front of her, and the bread beside it, and a spoon. Then he leaned forward on the island, both palms flat on the cold marble, and brought himself once again level with her face. "What hospital is your grandmother in?" he asked. "And where is your sister?" The girl set the cup down with both hands. Then, very carefully, she reached one arm around her brother, without dislodging him, and slid 2 fingers into the pocket of her thin coat. She drew out a small square of notebook paper, folded into quarters, the edges soft and gray from being held too long. She held it out across the marble. "Grandma wrote it for me," she said. "In case." Marcus took the paper and unfolded it under the kitchen light. The handwriting was blue ballpoint, pressed unsteady into the page by a hand that had not been entirely under its owner's command. Some of the letters trailed off. Some were heavier than others, where the pen had stopped to wait. Eleanor Bennett, St. Vincent's Hospital, Manhattan. Acute stroke unit, room 412. Sarah works the night shift here. If Lily is alone, call Sarah, 212-555-0184. He read it twice. The shape of the writing told him more than the words. Whoever had set it down had known they were running out of time to set anything down at all. He folded the paper once and held it out to Frankie without looking up. "Verify." Frankie took it and stepped out into the hall. Marcus could hear the low tones of his voice begin and stop and begin again as the calls were placed. He turned back to the girl. She had pulled the cup of milk closer to her brother again. The baby was still drinking, his small face tipped up against her collarbone now, his eyes mostly closed. "Why didn't you call your sister?" Marcus asked. "I don't have a phone, sir." She did not say it to complain. She said it the way she might have said, "The floor is white. Grandma has an old one. The battery died yesterday. Then how did you know to come this way?" "Sarah told me once. She said when she walks to the hospital from where she catches the bus, she goes through this neighborhood. I thought if I walked toward the same way she walks, I'd find her." She paused, and the corners of her mouth tightened. Marcus had already learned to watch for that. "Grandma fell down in the kitchen this afternoon," she said. "Mrs. Carla from downstairs called the ambulance. Sarah was at work. Sarah said stay with Mrs. Carla until she could come, but Mrs. Carla had her bottle out and she fell asleep on the couch, and Tommy kept crying because he was hungry, and there wasn't any milk left in the fridge, only the empty carton." She looked down at the top of her brother's head. Her voice did not break. It only got quieter. "So I picked him up and I went to find Sarah." Marcus looked at her. He thought of the distance from Sunset Park to Bay Ridge in heavy snow at 8 o'clock at night. He thought of the cars on those avenues. He did not let any of it onto his face. Frankie came back into the kitchen and gave a single nod. "Boss, it checks out. Eleanor Bennett, St. Vincent's, acute stroke unit, critical but stable. Sarah Bennett's been working the floor since 6. They've had the entire hospital looking for the kid for 3 hours. The neighbor finally woke up an hour ago and called it in. Marcus held the name in his head a moment. Bennett. It rang faintly somewhere far back. The way a song heard through a wall is familiar but not yet placeable. He could not say why. He did not try. He looked toward the tall kitchen windows. The snow outside had thickened into curtains. The Belt Parkway would be a slow river of taillights by now. Manhattan from Brooklyn on a night like this was not a 20-minute drive. It was however long the road decided to take. Boss. Frankie's voice low at his shoulder. If you want, I can get one of the boys to drive them up. But Genovese has a car running this neighborhood tonight. We don't want strange plates pulling out of your gate. Take the Bentley. I'll drive. Marcus was already shaking his head. He was watching the girl. She had drifted half an inch closer to the marble island. The baby's head had finally fallen all the way against her shoulder, the cup empty now. His small fingers curled into the front of her coat. She was holding him the way she had held him on the porch, not the way a child holds a sibling, but the way a parent holds a child who has finally stopped fighting sleep. I don't put kids in a car with a hired driver, Marcus said. I drive. He went to the foyer closet and lifted his black cashmere overcoat off its hanger. Frankie. 2 cars behind us, half a block back. Carry, but keep it covered. Yes, boss. Marcus crossed back into the kitchen. From the upper shelf of the linen press, he took down a folded wool blanket, soft, gray, threaded with dark green at the hem. It had been his mother's. He had kept it for 15 years in a cedar drawer and taken it out for nothing. He knelt beside the little girl, opened the blanket, and wrapped it carefully around both of them, around her thin shoulders and around the baby's small back, until only their 2 faces showed. Come on, he said softly. Let's go find your sister. The black Bentley rolled out through the iron gate, and its headlights swept once across the polished sign at the foot of the drive private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. In the back seat, Lily watched the words slide past the window. She did not flinch this time. She only watched them go. Frankie was at the wheel. Marcus had taken the passenger seat. It was a small thing, and the kind of thing Frankie would think about for a long time afterward, 15 years driving for the family, and he could count on one hand the number of times the boss had ridden up front with him. Tonight, Marcus had wanted to be able to turn his head. Behind them, 2 dark sedans pulled out at a respectful distance and stayed there. Lily sat in the middle of the back seat with the baby curled across her lap. The wool blanket from the kitchen was tucked around them both. Tommy was asleep now, his small mouth slightly open against her shoulder. The Bentley's heater hummed in the footwells. Outside, the snow came down in thick, slow drifts across the Belt Parkway, and the yellow sodium lights along the median blinked through it like lanterns seen from underwater. There were almost no other cars on the road. Marcus turned in his seat. He looked at her in the long, quiet way he had been looking at her since he had felt the bone in her shoulder. How far did you walk in the snow tonight, sweetheart? She thought about it. I started at 8. I don't have a watch. But the streetlights had been on for a long time before I knocked on your door. He counted in his head. From Sunset Park to Bay Ridge through this storm, with a 2-year-old in her arms, 3 hours, on the low end. He turned back to the road and closed his hand into a fist on his thigh. Frankie glanced at him sideways. He did not say anything. For a few minutes there was only the hum of the engine, the soft thud of the wipers, and the faint, even breathing of the baby in the back seat. Then Lily said, very small, Sir, do you know my sister? Marcus looked at her in the rear view. I don't think so. Why? When you caught me on the porch, she said, I saw your necklace, the cross with the blue stone in the middle. My sister Sarah has one just like it. Almost the same. The car was very quiet. She said somebody gave it to her once, a long time ago, somebody she helped, but she said the man never came to find her after, so she figured he didn't make it. Marcus's hand moved to his collar before he was aware of moving it. His fingertips found the chain, and through his shirt the small weight of the silver cross with the turquoise center, the one he had worn under his clothes every day for 3 years. Frankie's head snapped sideways for half a second and then back to the road. He did not say a word, but his knuckles tightened on the wheel. Marcus did not speak. A picture had begun to surface inside him out of order. The way pictures come when you are not the one calling them wet pavement behind a bar in Hell's Kitchen. The sour copper smell of his own blood. A girl's voice in the dark saying, stay with me. Stay with me. The ambulance is coming. A small, cool object pressed into his palm. Pray. You're going to live. And then nothing. For a long time. He could not see the girl's face in that picture. He had never been able to. He felt his heart beat once, hard, against the back of his ribs. In the back seat, Lily had let her head drift against the cold glass. Her eyes had begun to close in spite of her. "Are you tired, sir?" she murmured. "I'm sorry I made you stay up so late." Marcus drew a slow breath. He let it out before he answered. "I'm not tired, sweetheart," he said. "Rest if you can." She did, almost at once. The blanket rose and fell with her brother's small breath. The Bentley climbed onto the lower deck of the Verrazano Narrows. Off to the right, across the harbor, the towers of Manhattan rose out of the snow in long, lit columns, the windows still bright in places where someone was working too late or could not sleep. Marcus watched them without seeing them. After a long minute, Frankie spoke under his breath, just above the engine. "Boss, you want me to put a man on the Bennett family?" Quietly. "Background, finances, anyone who's leaning on them." Marcus kept his eyes on the lights ahead. "Yes," he said, "but not tonight. After I see her." Frankie nodded once. The car came down off the bridge into Manhattan and threaded its way north along the avenues, slow on the salted streets. By the time they turned onto 7th and the long, bright awning of St. Vincent's emergency entrance came into view, Marcus had been silent for almost 10 blocks. The Bentley swung in under the awning, and there, framed against the glow of the automatic glass doors, stood a young woman in dark blue scrubs and an open coat. Brown hair, pulled back hours ago, and now half escaping the band. One hand was pressed flat against her mouth. The other was wrapped white-knuckled around a cell phone she had stopped speaking into. She was crying. She was 25, maybe a little less. Her brown hair had given up its band hours ago, and half of it hung loose against her jaw. Her eyes were a pale, exhausted green, swollen from crying and from a shift she had not yet been allowed to end. The phone in her hand was still lit. She was not speaking into it. The Bentley stopped under the awning. The rear door cracked open before Marcus could reach it. "Sarah!" The cry was small and broken, but it carried. The young woman by the doors flinched, turned, and her phone fell out of her hand and bounced once on the wet concrete. She did not pick it up. She came across the curb at a half-run and dropped to her knees as Lily slid out into her arms. The wool blanket trailed behind. Tommy stirred, made one thin sound, and was still again. "You stupid baby." Sarah sobbed into her sister's hair. "Why did you go by yourself?" "I called the police. I thought." She did not finish. She only held on tighter. Marcus stepped down from the car and made himself stop 2 paces away. There were moments a stranger had no place inside. After a long minute, Sarah lifted her face. She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist and looked up to find the man who had brought her family back. "Sir, thank you. I don't know how to." The words stopped. Her face went very still and very pale, the way a face goes when the body recognizes something a moment before the mind catches up. For her, there was nothing yet 3 years of night shifts. 1,000 strangers under lights like these. She did not have his features. She had only ever had his blood on her sleeves and a feeling. For him there was everything, because she had just spoken, and his memory had finally placed the voice that had been moving under his skin since the back seat of the car. "Stay with me. The ambulance is coming. Don't close your eyes." Marcus put one gloved hand against the side of the Bentley and let it take some of his weight. Frankie's eyes shifted to him at once. Frankie had been there 3 years ago. He had seen his boss with a cross that did not belong to him, breathing thinly, alive. Marcus made himself stand straight. "You're Sarah Bennett." "Yes. How did you?" He lifted his right hand to his throat, drew the chain out of his collar, and let the small turquoise cross fall against the front of his coat. Sarah's hand went up to her mouth. She did not remember his face. She remembered the cross. It had been her mother's. She had pressed it into a dying man's palm in the rain because she had not been able to think of anything else to do. And she had told herself for 3 years that he had died with it. The hospital had said no name, no ID, transferred out. "It can't be," she whispered. "You're the man who..." Marcus's voice came out lower than he meant it. "You saved my life." Lily looked up between them, still half buried in her sister's coat. "Sarah, you really know him?" Sarah could not answer. Frankie stepped to Marcus's shoulder and spoke very low. "Boss, the stroke unit has us paged. Mrs. Bennett's stable, but they need a signature. Miss Bennett's not the legal guardian for the children yet." Marcus nodded once without looking away from her. "Can we go inside?" he said. "It's a long story. Let me help you with your grandmother first." Sarah drew a shaking breath and stood, Lily under one arm and Tommy folded between them. The blanket caught around all 3. The snow came down in soft flakes onto her hair, her shoulders, the little boy's cheek. For 3 years, she had carried this family through bus rides and night shifts and bills she had not opened. She had carried it 3 minutes ago, alone in the doorway with a phone in her hand and nobody on the other end. She looked up at the man whose name she had never known, whom she had once, in the dark, told to stay alive. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight she had been carrying alone shifted, very slightly, onto another shoulder. Inside, the long hallway off the stroke unit was quiet. The night nurses had pulled the lights down to a softer setting on the far wing, and most of the chairs in the small waiting alcove sat empty. Sarah signed the forms a tired charge nurse brought her on a clipboard. Marcus signed the line marked responsible party. The nurse glanced at the name twice and then did not glance at it again. When she was gone, the 4 of them settled into the alcove. Tommy had already gone back to sleep. His small body folded into the curve of Sarah's arm. Lily sat pressed against her sister's side, the wool blanket still over her knees. Frankie stood about 5 meters away, near the corner where the corridor turned, hands clasped in front of him, eyes on the elevators. For a long minute, nobody said anything. Then Marcus began to speak, and his voice came out lower than usual, without any of the weight he carried in it during business. 3 years ago, he said, somebody in my own house decided to sell me, a man who had been with my father since before I was born. Sarah did not interrupt. It was raining. I was leaving a bar in Hell's Kitchen, the back way, the alley behind O'Malley's. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. He paused. 2 in the stomach, 1 in the back. They left me there for the rats and the rain. Lily's small hand tightened on her sister's coat. I went down between 2 dumpsters. I remember thinking the gutter water was warm. I'd already made my peace with it. I wasn't going to make it to the end of the alley. He looked across at Sarah, and then somebody came running. A girl in scrubs. Off shift. Wrong place at the wrong time. Except it wasn't. She got down on the wet ground next to me, and she pressed her sleeve into the worst of it. She called 911. She kept talking to me so I wouldn't go under. Sarah's face had begun to break, very quietly, in the way faces break when a memory walks back into the room after years of being told it was nothing. She took the chain off her own neck, Marcus said. She put the cross in my hand and closed my fingers around it. She told me, pray, you're going to live. He stopped. When the ambulance came, I went out. When I woke up in the hospital, she was gone. No name, no badge number. The desk had logged it as a Good Samaritan. Female, mid-20s, brown hair, did not stay. Sarah's tears were running steadily now. She was not wiping them. I had people looking for 3 years, Marcus said. Every hospital, every clinic. I never found her. I kept the cross. It was the only promise I had. Sarah swallowed. Her voice came out cracked. I thought you died. She shook her head. That night I'd just broken up with somebody. I was walking home from my shift. I cut through that alley because I was angry, and I didn't want to wait for the bus. Her hand went to her mouth and came down again. I did what any nurse would have done. I didn't even tell anyone after. I was scared whoever did it might come looking. I told myself, if you lived, you lived. And then I let myself forget. You forgot me, Marcus said. But you didn't see what that night did. I changed the way I run my house after that. No narcotics, no women, no kids. Some of my own men still don't forgive me for it. Lily had been listening with her eyes very wide. She tilted her chin up at her sister. Sarah, she whispered, are you an angel? Sarah laughed once through the tears. It came out wet. No, baby, I'm not. Marcus reached into his coat and took out a plain white card. He set it on the small table between them. I'm taking care of your grandmother's bill, he said. All of it. Don't argue with me, Sarah. This isn't charity. This is a debt I've owed you for 3 years. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything, Sarah. He met her eyes. Please, let me do something right. I don't get a lot of chances at it. She looked at him then for what felt like the first time. Not at the coat, not at the man Frankie was guarding, just at him. She nodded. Thank you, Marcus. A door opened down the corridor. The doctor on call came toward them in soft shoes, pulling his mask down around his neck. Miss Bennett. She's stable. You can go in to see her now. Sarah stood. She lifted Lily's hand into hers. She turned once to look back at the man still sitting in the alcove in his expensive black coat, with the small turquoise cross out against his collar, and for the first time since she had known he existed, she did not see a dawn. She saw a lonely man. The Bentley pulled back through the iron gate at 5 a.m. The snow had stopped sometime between the bridge and Bay Ridge, and the lawn behind the house lay under a thick, untouched white. Marcus had not slept. He had sat in a chair beside an old woman's bed for 2 hours after Sarah finally let exhaustion lay her sister down across her lap, and he had watched the slow, stubborn rise and fall of the old woman's chest, and he had thought about a great many things he had not allowed himself to think about for a long time. He let himself in through the side door. He intended to go upstairs. He smelled the coffee before he had taken 3 steps. Vivian was sitting at the kitchen island in the pale gray light from the windows, both hands wrapped around a porcelain cup. Her hair was already pinned. Her robe had been replaced with a cream cashmere set she did not wear at home unless she expected an audience. She had been waiting. "You're up early," he said. "I was worried about you." Her voice was gentle. "You were out all night with those children. Was there trouble? Their grandmother's in the hospital. I helped with the bill." She lifted the cup, took a small sip, set it down again. "How generous. How much? 5,000? 10? As much as it needs to be." She put the cup down a little harder than she had picked it up. The clink of porcelain on marble was small and sharp. "Marcus, you're a don. You cannot be the man who pays for stranger children's hospital rooms in the middle of the night. Your enemies will think you've gone soft. The Romano family will laugh. The capos will whisper." He looked at her without blinking. "Vivienne, my family decides who is strong and who is weak, not the Romanos, not the capos." He paused. "And not you." It was the first time in 5 years he had said the word "not" to her in that tone, and she heard it. He saw her hear it. Her chin lifted, very slightly. Her mouth softened into the small, polished smile she used when she had been corrected and intended to make the correction her own. "I'm sorry," she said. "I only worry about how you look. We should think about moving the wedding forward, you and I. June is too far. People stop taking promises seriously when they wait." He set his hand on the back of a chair. "What wedding?" She laughed. It was a dry, careful laugh. "Oh, Marcus, have you forgotten the contract between your father and mine? June, 3 months. That contract was signed by my father." He pushed off the chair and stood straight. "I have not signed anything." The color went out of her face. "You're joking. You break that. My father will." "He'll do what?" Marcus said. "Vivian, I am not afraid of Salvatore Romano. I have honored that agreement for 5 years out of respect for a dying man. But I get to choose who I marry." She swallowed once. He watched her recalculate. He watched her understand, possibly for the first time, that the future she had assumed was paid for and waiting had been hers only on his sufferance. She covered it well. The smile came back. Smaller, prettier, with a hairline crack down the middle. "All right, Marcus. We'll talk about this when you've slept." She rose and walked toward the door of the kitchen. At the threshold she turned, one hand light on the frame. "By the way, you aren't planning to keep those children in this house, are you?" "I do hope not." He did not answer. She held his eyes a beat longer than was comfortable, and then she was gone, slippers soundless on the marble. He waited until he heard the upstairs door close. Then he took out his phone and called Frankie. "Boss, I want everything on the Bennett family by tonight. Sarah works nights at St. Vincent's. Find out where the parents are. Find out what they owe. Find out if anybody's leaning on them." "Yes, boss. And put 2 of our people on the apartment in Sunset Park. Quiet. Nobody sees them. They're not surveillance. They're protection." There was a small pause on the line. "Boss," Frankie said, carefully. "Are you sure? Vivian is not going to take this lying down." "I know." "All right, I've decided, Frank." "Yes, boss." He hung up. He crossed the kitchen to the long window above the sink and stood there with the phone still in his hand. Out in the garden, the new snow lay over the boxwood, and the iron benches in soft, even drifts. Somewhere in the hedge, the black cat was making her morning rounds, a small, dark shape against all that white. For the first time in many years, Marcus Castellano stood inside his own house and let himself imagine a future that did not belong to the family. 3 days later, Marcus came back to the stroke unit with a wrapped bundle of white carnations under his arm. He had not been able to bring himself to send roses. Roses had a meaning he was not ready to give. Carnations had been his mother's flower. She had kept them on the kitchen windowsill until the petals went soft, and she had told him, when he was small, that they were the flower for people who loved quietly. The afternoon light in room 412 was thin and gray. Sarah was sitting in the chair beside the bed with a slim book open across her knees, reading aloud in a soft, careful voice. The book was Robert Frost. The poem was the one about the woods on a snowy evening. Tommy was on the long, upholstered bench under the window, lying on his stomach with 2 new bears propped up in front of him, conducting an earnest, wordless meeting between them. Lily knelt beside him with a 3rd bear in her arms, the tag still on its ear. Frankie had picked them up that morning. Marcus had asked for soft. Frankie had erred on the side of soft. Sarah looked up first. Her cheeks colored. She closed the book around her thumb. The old woman in the bed turned her head slowly on the pillow. Her hair was thin and white and pulled back over her ears. Her eyes, when they found him, were the same shade of pale green as her granddaughter's, and twice as awake. "So you're him," she said. Marcus stopped at the foot of the bed and inclined his head. "Mrs. Bennet, the night nurse told me a gentleman paid the bill." She let her gaze travel from his shoes to his collar. "Turns out it's you. I'm a friend of Sarah's, ma'am." Eleanor Bennet looked at her granddaughter, then back at him. "Friends since when?" Sarah's color went a shade higher. "Recently, Grandma." The old woman lifted one frail hand and crooked a finger. "Come here, young man. Sit where I can see you." He crossed to the chair beside her bed and sat. She reached out and took his right hand, turning it over between her own thin ones. Her fingers were dry and cool. She studied the back of his knuckles a moment, the small white seams where old wounds had closed badly. "That's a lot of scars," she said. "What kind of work is yours?" He did not lie to her. He had a feeling she would know. "Business, ma'am. Some of it not very clean." He held her eyes. "I'm trying to do better." She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "Good men know they aren't perfect." She patted the back of his hand once. "Thank you for getting Lily home." A small, deliberate weight climbed onto his lap before he had time to react. "Mr. Marcus." Lily had set the new bear aside and arrived at his knee with the matter-of-fact authority of a child who had decided, somewhere in the last 72 hours, that this man no longer required permission. She sat on his thigh and looked up. "Did you know Tommy says milk now? He said it this morning. He doesn't cry anymore." Something in his chest went briefly warm, in a way he did not have a clean word for. Across the bed, Sarah had gone very still in her chair. She was watching her sister with the careful, uncertain attention of a person who had never seen Lily climb onto a stranger before. After a while, Marcus and Sarah stepped out into the corridor. "You don't have to do all of this," she said. "The flowers, the bears, the bill, Sarah." He looked at her. "I spent 3 years looking for you. Now that I've found you, you want me to stop?" She let out a soft, tired laugh. "You're stubborn. I've been told." They stood quiet for a moment. It was not awkward. "Are you married, Marcus?" "I was promised to someone 5 years ago. A political match my father made before he died. I'm undoing it." She nodded once. She did not ask anything else. He liked that about her. Very much. He turned to go. A small hand caught his coat sleeve at the level of his hip. "Mr. Marcus." Lily had followed them into the hallway. "Are you coming back?" He looked up at her sister. "If your sister says it's all right." Sarah's mouth tilted into something that was not quite a smile. "It's all right." He walked out of the hospital with his collar still warm where the little girl's hand had been. His phone buzzed once in his pocket as he reached the curb. He took it out under the awning. "Boss, somebody just photographed you walking into St. Vincent's. I'd bet it's Vivian's man. Be careful." In the upstairs parlor of the Castellano house, Vivienne Ashford was scrolling through photographs on an iPad. The first one she had paused on was Marcus walking under the hospital awning with white carnations under his arm. The second was through a 4th-floor window, taken from across the street with a long lens. In it, Marcus was sitting in a chair beside an old woman's bed. A small girl in a pink sweater sat on his lap. His head was tilted toward her. The cup of tea on the side table cracked when Vivienne brought her hand down on the wood. A thin brown line ran across the marquetry. Porcelain shards lay around the saucer. She did not move to clean any of it. She picked up her phone instead and dialed a number she had used twice before for things she did not put in writing. "Ray, I want everything on a nurse named Sarah Bennet. Where she lives, what shifts she works, old boyfriends, family debts, the whole picture by tomorrow morning." She listened. "I don't care what it costs." Quietly, she hung up and stood at the window with her arms folded. She thought it through carefully, the way her mother had taught her to think. She could not touch the girl directly. Anything traceable would come back through Marcus's people in a day, and she had seen what came back through Marcus's people. The girl had to leave him. He could not be seen taking her away, so she would make the work go. The next morning, an anonymous tip reached the compliance line at St. Vincent's. The caller said she had information from 3 years ago that a night shift nurse named Sarah Bennet had treated an unidentified gunshot patient on the street and never filed the incident, violating both hospital protocol and city regulation. The caller offered just enough specifics to be impossible to dismiss. By 2 p.m, Sarah was sitting across a desk from her unit director, hands folded in her lap, listening to the words, "internal review and suspension pending investigation" land, one after another in a voice that was trying very hard to sound impartial. She had no idea who had reported her. She walked out of the office with her ears ringing. Marcus heard about it before her shift was over. He kept ears at the hospital now, the way he kept ears in most places that mattered to him. He picked up the phone in his study. The hospital director who answered had been at a black tie fundraiser 16 months earlier, accepting a check from a discreet foundation that bore no Castellano name, but had paid for the entire renovation of the emergency wing. "Sarah Bennett is mine," Marcus said. 3 years ago, she did exactly what your protocol asks any nurse to do. She rendered aid on a public street and waited for EMS. There was no concealment. "I would not like to see your hospital sued for wrongful termination." "I understand, Mr. Castellano," quietly. "Yes, sir." The investigation was closed by the next morning. He waited until evening to call Sarah. She was at the apartment in Sunset Park. He could hear Lily in the background, telling Tommy something serious about a bear. "Sarah, somebody is moving against you. You need to be careful." "Who?" Her voice climbed. "Why would anyone, my former fiancé? I'm dealing with her. But I need you to promise me something. Anything strange happens, anything, you call me first. Not the police. Me. Promise me." There was a pause. "I promise. By morning." The news of the killed investigation had reached Vivienne. She put a hairline crack into a second cup before she remembered to set it down. Then she picked up the phone again. "Father." The voice on the other end was slow and thick, a voice that had been roughened by 40 years of cigars and patience. "Vivienne. He's breaking it. The wedding. He's letting some night shift nurse take my place. And you would like me to do what, Vivienne?" "You're the wisest man I know, Father." She let her voice hush. "You'll know how." There was a long silence on the line. Don Salvatore Romano did not answer right away. He never did. He was thinking the way he always thought about leverage, about timing, about old debts that had never been collected. He thought about the Castellano shipping yard at the south end of the Brooklyn waterfront, the largest unwatched smuggling pier on the eastern seaboard, the one parcel of New York he had wanted his entire adult life. The Ashford-Castellano marriage would have given him 51% of it through Vivienne's name within a year. Without that marriage, he would never see it again. He thought about Marcus Castellano, the only Don in the 5 boroughs who had publicly refused to move narcotics through his roots. The boy with principles, the boy who slept easy. He thought about his own brother Vito, who had bled out on a Brooklyn sidewalk in the autumn of 1998 with a Castellano bullet in his chest. Salvatore Romano smiled into the phone. "Vivienne, my dear, leave it to your father. I'll teach the Castellano boy that you cannot say no to the Romano family." 2 weeks passed. Eleanor Bennett was moved out of the stroke unit and onto a slower, brighter floor where the nurses spoke in their normal voices. Sarah and the children no longer slept in the Sunset Park apartment. Marcus had moved them, quietly and without fanfare, into a Castellano-owned brownstone walk-up in Brooklyn Heights, the kind of place his family kept on the books for its own reasons. 2 of his men sat in a sedan across the street in shifts. Lily never noticed them. That was the point. Marcus came by 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes he brought food in foil-wrapped trays from the kitchen of the woman who had raised him after his mother died, a woman who still called him Marco and pressed olive oil on him by the bottle. Sometimes he brought books for Lily, picture books the first week and chapter books the second, because Lily read faster than he had estimated. Tommy began to lift his arms toward Marcus the moment he came through the door, and one evening the small mouth produced, with great effort, a wet syllable that everyone in the room decided was chew. Lily had a game. The game was called Naming the Bears. It required Marcus to sit cross-legged on the rug, while Lily presented each bear in turn for inspection. The biggest bear, the one Frankie had grumbled about carrying out of FAO Schwartz, she had named Mr. Mark. She did not announce this. She simply held him up one evening and said, "This is Mr. Mark. He's the boss of the bears." In the kitchen doorway, Sarah pressed her dish towel to her mouth, so Marcus would not see her laugh. Later that night, after the children were asleep, the 2 of them sat on the small wrought-iron balcony off the brownstones' living room, coffee cups warm in their hands. The lights of Lower Manhattan stretched out across the river in long, soft strands. The wind smelled of cold metal and bakery exhaust from the block below. "Do you regret any of it?" Sarah asked. "Your life." Marcus turned his cup once on the small table between them. "I was born into the Castellano house. I didn't get a choice about that. But I tried to be the best Don I knew how to be. No narcotics. No women. No children. Some of the men in my world laugh at me for it. I'm not laughing." She looked at him over the rim. "I think it's decent." He looked back at her. The city light caught half of her face. "Sarah, after this wedding I'm undoing, I'm going to step back from the family. As far back as I can. I don't want Lily and Tommy growing up looking at me the way I had to look at my father. You don't have to do that for me. I'm doing it for me. You just gave me a reason." The silence after that was not awkward. He reached across and took her hand. She did not pull it away. They did not kiss. They both knew. Inside, On the other side of the glass, Lily was kneeling on the couch with her chin on the back of it. She pulled gently at her brother's pajama sleeve. "Tommy, look," Sarah's smiling. 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, Sarah took the children to the small Key Food on Henry Street for milk and bread. They were on the sidewalk by the crosswalk. Lily was holding Tommy's mittened hand. A black SUV with mud on its plates came up the curb at speed. Sarah saw it half a second before it was on them. She threw both arms wide and went sideways, and the three of them rolled into the doorway of a closed dry cleaner as the SUV scraped the metal of a parked car and kept going. The driver did not slow. The plates were unreadable on the camera afterward. Sarah called Marcus, before she called anyone else. He was there in 20 minutes. Frankie a half step behind him. He pulled the street cam footage from a man who owed him a favor. He hired a hacker who owed him another, to walk the plate back to its source. The plate was a forgery on top of a forgery. He knew. The whole shape of it told him. Whoever had planned that pass had not been planning to bury anyone. It was a warning. It was a boo. That same night he drove back to Bay Ridge for the first time in 8 days. Vivian was in the upstairs parlor with a glass of red wine. "Marcus, darling," he set a single photograph face up on the side table, a grainy frame from a traffic camera. The driver's profile was just visible through the windshield. "This man is your driver. I have no idea what you're, Vivian." His voice was very level. "You are playing with people's lives." She tried for a laugh. It did not entirely come. She set her wineglass down. She stepped back from the table. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "This is the last warning I will give you," he said. "Touch Sarah or those children again, and I will forget that there was ever an alliance between this house and the Ashfords." Vivian was gone from the Castellano house by the next morning. Marcus did not watch her leave. Frankie did, from the front steps, hands in his pockets, while a black town car loaded her 3 matched suitcases into the trunk and drove her back to her father's place in Mill Basin. The brownstone on Henry Street was empty by noon. By dusk, Sarah and the children were in Bay Ridge. Lily walked the whole ground floor of the gray stone mansion before she said anything. She walked it slowly, like a small inspector, with one hand trailing along the wallpaper. She stopped in the doorway of the library. "Mr. Mark." Her voice had gone hushed. "You have a whole library. Of books. Am I allowed to read them? All of them, kid." Marcus was standing behind her in the hall. "Don't tear any." She crossed the threshold like a child entering a church. Tommy made his own discovery elsewhere. Sarah found him 3 minutes later sitting on the rug in the side parlor with both hands buried in the fur of a black cat the size of his torso, while the cat eyes half closed, tail flicking purred against the side of his small leg. Sarah stood in the doorway with her mouth open. "That cat," she said, "doesn't let anybody touch her." Marcus came up behind her. He looked at the boy, and the cat, and the soft sound coming up from the rug. "Looks like Lucia's decided to accept the new family." The phrase fell out of him before he had measured it. The new family. Sarah's color rose. She turned her face away and busied herself with a non-existent crease in her sleeve. He let it go without making it worse. That night, after the children had been put to bed in the room next to Sarah's, Marcus stopped at her door. He did not come in. He stood with one hand braced against the frame. "Sarah, I'm sorry I dragged you into this kind of danger." She had been folding a small sweater. She set it down. She came to lean against her side of the door. "You didn't drag me. I chose to stay. You're not afraid of me?" He kept his voice low. "I am what I am." She looked up at him. 3 years ago I saw you in that alley," she said. "I saw a man afraid to die. I saw a man who was sorry for things. I saw a man holding a cross and praying. That's the man I saw, not a Don." He stepped a little closer. It was a short kiss, not a hungry one. Their mouths barely moved, but neither of them pulled back, and afterward they stood there for a moment with their foreheads almost touching, and they both knew. In the morning, Lily padded into the kitchen barefoot and stopped dead. Marcus was at the stove, the big stove. He had a spatula in his hand and a dish towel over one shoulder, and he was making, with great concentration, an attempt at fried eggs. The whole family ate together at the long table. Sarah on one side, Tommy in the high chair Marcus had bought yesterday afternoon, Lily on a cushion to bring her up to plate level. Halfway through, Lily looked around the table. "Is this," she said, "what a family is?" Sarah's eyes shone too brightly. "It's a kind of family, sweetheart." Marcus set down his coffee. "It's a real family," he said. In Mill Basin, at almost the same hour, Vivienne sat across a heavy walnut desk from her father. The office smelled of cigar and old leather. Salvatore Romano did not look up from the cigar he was rolling slowly between his fingers when she came in. He let her sit. He let her wait. "Vivienne," he said at last. "You tried the children. You tried the nurse. Neither of these worked." "Father," he raised one finger. She stopped. "It is my turn now." She sat very still. "What are you going to do?" He set the cigar down. He folded his hands. "I am going to take the nurse and the 2 children. Not to kill them. Not yet. They will be hostages. The Castellano boy will come for them onto my ground, where I choose. And on my ground, I will take his Brooklyn peer. And you, my daughter," he smiled, "will be a very rich widow." She swallowed. "And the children? You are getting soft," he said. "No, father. I only meant if they die," he said. "It will be an accident. If you want the Castellano boy back, do not bring sentiment into this room. Do you understand me, Vivienne?" She looked at the tooled leather in front of her. She thought about a small girl in a pink sweater on Marcus's lap. She thought about a baby who had once smelled like cold air and milk. She nodded. Salvatore picked up his cigar again. He smiled around the end of it. "Good. Next week. I already have the men." A week passed inside the gray stone house, and the gray stone house began, very quietly, to feel like something else. Sarah learned which floorboard outside the upstairs hallway always creaked at night, and stopped flinching when it did. Lily learned where the cookies were and pretended she had not. Tommy learned the route between the living room rug and the cat's favorite cushion in the side parlor, and walked it 20 times a day. Lucia tolerated him the way an old aunt tolerates a small visitor with a flick of the tail and absolutely no intention of leaving. On the 7th morning, Eleanor Bennett came home from the hospital. Marcus had given her the largest of the ground floor bedrooms, the one his mother had used in her last summer. He had also bought a wheelchair, a railed bed, and 3 different cushions before settling on the one the home care nurse said was best. Eleanor sat in the chair by the window for most of the first day, eyes shut against the sun coming off the garden snow. By the 2nd day, she was asking for tea. By the 3rd, she had asked Marcus to push her into the library and leave her there alone for an hour. That evening, after the children had been fed, she found him in the hallway and laid her thin hand on his sleeve. "Marcus, sit a minute." He sat on the bench beside her chair. "Do you love my granddaughter?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're a Mafia man. Sarah is a nurse. Those are 2 different worlds." "I'm building a bridge, ma'am." She smiled. She lifted her hand off his sleeve and put it over his. "Then build it fast, son. Bridges fall down." That night, Marcus had a small dinner laid for the family. Lily wore a blue dress that Sarah had pressed by hand over a kitchen towel. Tommy was poured into a tiny sailor outfit that he immediately tried to chew. Sarah came down the staircase in a simple dark green dress, her hair pinned loose, no lipstick. Marcus stood at the foot of the stairs to watch her come. After dinner, before dessert, he set a small velvet box beside her plate. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a thin silver chain, and on the chain a small angel pressing its hands together over its chest. Sarah looked across the candles at him. "Are you proposing to me?" He laughed, low. "Not yet. When I propose, you'll know. This is a quieter promise." She smiled at her plate. He saw her press the box closed against her sternum. Lily slid off her cushion and came around the table. She pulled gently at the cuff of Marcus's jacket. "Mr. Mark." "Yes, sweetheart. Can I call you Daddy?" He went still in the chair. The candle nearest him moved a little in his breath. He pushed his chair back and got down on one knee on the dining room rug, the way he had got down on one knee on a snowy porch a few weeks ago, and he opened his arms. Lily walked into them. "Yes, sweetheart. Yes." His eyes were wet. He did not bother trying to hide it. In the high chair, Tommy looked at his sister. He blinked once. He puckered his small mouth. "Da, da." Sarah turned her face into the curtain at the window so no one would see. In the corner of the room, Frankie Doyle stood with his hands folded in front of him. And for the first time in 15 years of service, he saw the boss cry. He looked down at his shoes and gave the moment its privacy. A block down the avenue, parked at the curb under a dead street lamp, a black sedan sat with its lights off. 3 men inside, infrared binoculars, the faintest sound of a thermos being unscrewed. The man in the passenger seat brought a phone to his ear. "Report. Family is consolidated. Targets all in residence. 6 on the front grounds, 4 on the rear. We hold for the signal." The voice on the line was Salvatore Romano's. "Tomorrow morning, the nurse takes the 2 little ones to the park for fresh air. There are no guards inside the park." In the leather chair across from him, Vivienne sat with one knee drawn up, biting at the side of her thumb. The Romano study was warm and very quiet. "Father." Her voice was small. "You promise no harm comes to the children. Promise me." Salvatore did not answer. He returned the phone to its cradle. In the Castellano house, the lamps had been turned down. In the deep armchair by the fire, Marcus sat with the small weight of Tommy curled against his shoulder, asleep. Sarah was tucked under his arm, her cheek against the line of his collarbone, her eyes closing slowly. Across from them, in the matching chair, Lily had fallen asleep with the big bear Mr. Mark pressed up under her chin. The fire popped once. The house breathed. It was a perfect family minute, and it was the last one before the storm. The morning came up clean and cold. The sky over Bay Ridge was the pale blue of a winter weekend. Sarah took the children to Owl's Head Park because Lily had been asking, and because Marcus had said yes. With 2 men, Frankie handpicked them and sent them ahead in plain coats. They walked at 30 paces, one near the south path, one near the playground gate. They did not look like guards. That was the point. Sarah found a bench by the swing set. She had a book in her hand she had not yet opened. Lily ran across the rubber mat in her boots and lifted Tommy into the toddler swing, holding him under both arms until the strap was buckled. She pushed him gently. He made a small, delighted sound. The first one Sarah had heard him make all week. The white van came up the pedestrian path at speed. It was the kind of van the park's people used. It was not a park's van. The doors slid open before it had stopped. 4 men, black masks, moving fast. 2 went for the Castellano men. The shots were quiet, flat, suppressed pops, swallowed almost at once by the cold air. One of the guards went down without making any sound at all. The other got off half a step before the butt of a rifle caught him across the temple. "Lily, Tommy!" Sarah was already running. The book hit the ground. A masked man had Tommy under one arm. A second had Lily by the wrist and was dragging her toward the open van. Sarah hit the man with Tommy at a dead sprint. She bit at the wrist over the strap. She kicked. He swung once, awkwardly, and missed. He swung again with the side of the pistol and caught her square at the temple. She went down on the rubber mat. Blood opened at her hairline. "Sarah! M.R. Mark! Mr. Mark!" Lily's scream tore across the playground. Mothers were already running, pulling children toward the path, faces white. One woman crouched behind a tree with her phone braced against the bark, recording. 2 minutes. That was all it took. The van swallowed Sarah, Lily, and Tommy, and was gone down the avenue, plates muddied, no make. The video went up before the police arrived. 5 minutes after that, Frankie was on the front steps of the gray stone house with his coat half on, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He did not knock. He put his shoulder into the study door. "Boss." Marcus looked up from the ledger. Sarah, Lily, Tommy, Owl's Head, 4 guys, white van, masks. Our 2 are down. Carlo's gone. Mike's bleeding out the back of his head. Marcus stood up so fast the chair went over behind him. The coffee cup on the desk hit the floor and shattered against the leg of the couch. He yanked the top right drawer open. He had a Glock in his hand by the time he finished standing. Vivienne. His voice was unrecognizable. Salvatore. Frankie did not argue. They both knew. The phone on the desk rang 10 minutes later. The number was unknown. Marcus picked it up on the second tone and put it on speaker. "Marcus. My boy. Salvatore. I have your things. Salvatore. I knew you would do something this stupid." The old man laughed. It was a slow, contented laugh. "Stupid. I am about to take your Brooklyn Pier. Red Hook, slip 12, midnight tonight. You come alone. You bring the transfer of title. You take back the nurse and the 2 pups." He paused. "If you are 1 minute late, I begin with the little girl's fingers. You touch a hair on any of them, Salvatore, and I will burn the Romano family down to the last grandchild. Then be on time, Don Marcus." The line went dead. Marcus stood with the phone still in his hand. His other hand was on the desk, knuckles white. Frankie watched him. In 15 years he had never seen Marcus shake from rage. "Frankie." "Yes, boss. Call everybody. Capos, soldiers, allies. Tonight we go to war." "Boss." Frankie hesitated. "He told you to come alone." "I will go alone at the front. You take the second wave around the back of the pier from the water side. Salvatore won't believe I'd hit him head on. That's where he'll be soft." He crossed to the long cabinet behind his desk. He turned a key he had not turned in 7 years. The doors swung open onto rifles, vests, ammunition stacked in neat black blocks. He took down a Kevlar vest. He set it on the desk. He reached past it, to the back of the top shelf, and lifted out a heavy old service. Glock with worn grip tape and his father's initials cut faintly into the bottom of the magazine well. 7 years he had not picked it up. He weighed it once in his hand. For the next 4 hours, The gray stone house in Bay Ridge stopped being a home. Cars came up the driveway with their lights off and their doors closing softly. 30 men filed in through the side entrance, capos in long coats, and soldiers in heavy boots, and they did not take their boots off. The chandeliers in the front rooms had been turned down. Lucia had retreated under the library couch and would not come out. Marcus had cleared the dining room table. A red hook waterfront map was now spread across it, weighted at the corners with 4 crystal glasses. He stood at the head of the table with the Glock holstered against his ribs and a black coffee cooling at his elbow that nobody was going to drink. He moved his finger across the paper. Slip 12. Containers stacked 5 high here, here, and here. One main road in. Water on the south face. Salvatore's people will be heaviest at the gate and along the front line of containers. He looked up. Frankie. Boss. You take 10 and come in from the water. 2 cigarette boats. No engines past the breakwater paddle the last 100 yards. Hit the southern face when my signal goes. Yes, boss. Sal, a heavy man at his right shoulder. You take 10 in the sanitation trucks. The South Brooklyn route runs that block at 11:45. We bought the dispatcher. You ride that route. You peel off at the second corner, and you are at the front gate when I draw fire. Cut the chain. You're the ground hammer. Yes, boss. Nico. A lean man with a rifle case already at his feet. 8 on the high containers. Spread along the east stack. Suppressors. You don't shoot until I move my left hand to my coat. After that you don't stop until I tell you. Boss. Marcus tapped the center of the map. I go in the front. 2 with me. We are the bait. Salvatore wants me on his ground. He gets me on his ground, long enough for the rest of you to be where you need to be. He had one more call to make. A second ally had already arrived in person. Don Tony Lombardi was a small, elegant man in his 60s who had hated Salvatore Romano since 1991 over a deal that did not need to be remembered tonight. He sat in a chair near the window with a glass of red wine no one had offered him. 15 of mine, Tony said. At your gate by 10. They wear your colors. You want them. You have them, Marcus. Thank you, Tony. Bring those children home. Marcus dialed one more number. He took the phone into the hall. Mike. The voice that answered was thick with sleep. Then it was awake. Marcus. Red Hook tonight. Slip 12. I need a 2-hour window with no blue and white. After that, send anyone you like. You'll have a lot to clean up. A long silence on the line. Marcus. What are you doing? Saving my family. The silence broke. All right. Captain Mike O'Brien drew a long breath. I'll slow the cars. 2 hours. In a basement room under a warehouse 2 streets back from the same pier, Sarah Bennett opened her eyes. Her temple throbbed in a slow, sickening rhythm. Someone had wrapped a thick gauze pad around her head. The floor beneath her cheek was bare concrete. The light came from a single bulb behind a wire cage. She turned her head an inch, and the pain bloomed white. She blinked it back. Lily was in the corner, knees drawn up, both arms locked around Tommy, who was making the dry, exhausted sound of a child who had cried until there was nothing left. Lily was watching the door. Sarah dragged herself across the concrete on her elbows. The world tilted twice. She made it. She got both children inside her arms. I'm sorry, she whispered into Lily's hair. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Don't cry, Sarah. Lily's voice was thin but steady. Mr. Mark is coming, he promised. The door clicked. Steel hinges. Vivienne stepped in. She wore a long fur coat that did not belong in this room. She carried a paper plate with 2 sandwiches on it and a small carton of milk. She set the plate down on the floor. She did not meet Sarah's eyes. Eat. Sarah stared up at her. Recognition came slowly through the pain. You're his fiancé, former fiancé. Vivienne looked at the wall. I never wanted to hurt the children. I just wanted you out of his life. Do you have any idea, Sarah said, what you're playing with? Vivienne did not answer. Lily lifted her face out of Tommy's hair. Her dark eyes found Vivienne's and held. Do you have a little brother? Vivienne's throat moved. Lily's voice stayed soft. My brother is hungry. Could you give him a little more milk? Like Mr. Mark did the night I knocked on his door. Vivienne looked down. She looked at Tommy then. Really looked at him at the small mouth gone slack with exhaustion, at the curl of his hand against his sister's collar, and for the first time she did not see leverage. She saw a child. She turned away fast. She did not answer. She pulled the door shut behind her. But something in her had been switched on, and it had begun, very faintly, to burn. 11:45. Slip 12. Red Hook. The fog had come up off the harbor an hour earlier, and now lay thick along the pier, swallowing the high containers at their middles, leaving the tops of the stacks floating in the dark like the keels of ships seen upside down. The salt smell of the water mixed with the rust of old steel and the diesel of trucks that had not run that night. The Bentley turned in past the cut chain at the gate. The headlights swept once across the wet concrete. Marcus was alone at the front. The two men he had brought in with him had stayed back at the breach, by his order. Across the pier, a black Mercedes sat with its lights on. Salvatore Romano stood at its bumper with a cane in one hand, his weight off his bad knee. 8 men were spread along the pier behind him in a loose, confident line, their hands at their sides, their coats open. To Salvatore's left, 20 feet back, 2 of his men stood at the open door of a steel shipping container painted faded red. Inside the container sat Sarah, Lily, and Tommy. Sarah's wrists were tied. Lily was holding her brother. Tommy was not making a sound. To Salvatore's right, near the rear quarter of the Mercedes, Vivian Ashford stood in her long fur coat with her arms folded tight against her ribs. She did not move when the Bentley came in. Marcus stepped out of the car. He had a leather attaché in his right hand. The papers inside were blank. The Glock was inside his coat. Don Marcus. Salvatore smiled around his cigar. On time. Salvatore, let me see my family first. Salvatore tipped his cane. The 2 men at the container shoved the prisoners out into the open. Sarah stumbled. The bandage at her temple was already soaked through. Lily caught herself on her sister's leg and looked up. She saw Marcus. "D.A.A." She ran, half a step. The man behind her caught her by the back of her coat. It hit Marcus harder than the rounds in his vest were going to. It was the first time the little girl had called him that out loud, in front of the world. He set the attaché down on the wet concrete, 10 meters between him and the old man. There, the pier. Let them go. Salvatore laughed. Marcus, I am not a stupid man. They walk when I have read the title. He flicked 2 fingers. One of his men stepped forward to collect the case. That was when Marcus pressed the small button at the bottom of his coat pocket. 3 minutes of chaos. From the top of the east stack of containers, 8 muzzles lit up at once. 2 of Salvatore's men along the front line went down without sound. A third spun and fell. From the south face came the soft, awful coughing of suppressed rounds and the slap of wet rope. Frankie's team was over the lip of the pier in seconds. Dark coats, moving low. From the north gate, the engine of a city sanitation truck screamed, and the truck came through the half-open chain and laid it flat. Sal's men were over the side and onto the line of cover before Salvatore had brought his cigar all the way down. Salvatore raised his pistol toward Marcus. Marcus was already moving. He went down to one knee on the concrete and fired up. The first round went wide. The second took Salvatore in the thigh. The old man buckled against the bumper of his car. The pier broke open. Container walls rang under impacts. A wooden crate near the front line burst into splinters. One of Salvatore's soldiers grabbed Sarah from behind and dragged her up against him as a shield, his arm across her throat. Sarah did the only thing she could think of. She drove her elbow back into his ribs. She let her knees go. The 2 of them went down together in a tangle, and she rolled over Lily and Tommy with her body. Marcus was already there. He came across the open ground at a sprint. Pistol up, he shot the man through the side of his head before the man had fully reacquired his grip. He dropped down behind them. Sarah, are they hurt? We're okay. Blood was running down her face from the reopened wound. Cover yourself! He pushed all 3 of them behind the steel of a closed container. Salvatore was on the concrete now, leaning against the wheel of the Mercedes, his trouser leg dark to the knee. He was still alive. He still had his weapon. Marcus had turned to give an order. His back was to the Mercedes for 2 seconds. Salvatore lifted the pistol. Vivienne stood 5 meters away. She had not moved through the whole of it. She saw the line of his arm. She saw where the line ended. Something behind her ribs that had been waiting for this moment finally chose. Marcus, behind you! Marcus dropped and twisted. His shot took Salvatore high in the shoulder and threw him back against his own car. The pistol clattered to the wet concrete. Salvatore looked across the pier at his daughter. His face went through one expression and into another. He had a second pistol in his coat. He raised it before anyone could reach him. He fired once. Vivienne staggered. The fur coat darkened over her sternum. She went down to one knee, then onto her side on the wet concrete. The fight kept going. The Romano men were already losing. They did not all know it yet. Marcus stood at the steel side of the container with Lily shaking in his arms. Sarah and Tommy braced behind him, the harbor wind cold at his face. He looked across the pier at the bodies and the blood and the slow surrender of the men who were left, and he understood, without putting words to it, that this was the last time he would ever do this. The first squad cars slid into Red Hook at 1 a.m, exactly as agreed. By then, the Castellano men were already gone over the breakwater and through the side streets the way water leaves a basin. Frankie's people had walked the pier once with flashlights. They had counted 12 Romano men on the wet concrete. They had counted 3 of their own. The 3 were lifted gently and carried to a black van and driven home to their mothers and their wives. Marcus had stood at the door of the van as each one was loaded and put his hand on each forehead and said the names out loud. Salvatore was alive when the patrol cars arrived. He was leaning against his own bumper, conscious, the trouser leg of his suit black with blood. The arresting officers did not have to look hard for the federal warrant. Captain Mike O'Brien had quietly walked through 3 different desks in the past 4 hours. Salvatore Romano went out of slip 12 in handcuffs. Vivienne went out before him, on a stretcher. The single round had torn through one lung and missed her heart by what the EMT later called the width of a cigarette. She did not open her eyes when they lifted her. Sarah, Lily, and Tommy were already back in Bay Ridge by the time the first sirens came. Marcus's private physician was waiting on the front steps of the gray stone house with a bag in each hand. He stitched the gash at Sarah's temple in the kitchen, under the bright lamp over the island. 8 neat sutures. No fuss. Lily had a ring of bruise around her left wrist that he examined in his palm as if it were a small bird. Tommy let no one but Sarah hold him. He did not cry. He had already cried himself empty in the basement room. He just put his face into the side of Sarah's neck and breathed, and would not look at the lights. Lily, when Marcus crouched in front of her, lifted her chin. "I'm okay, Daddy." The word again. The word still. Late that night, after the children had been settled into the room next to Sarah's and the doctor had gone home and the doors of the house had been double-checked twice by Frankie, Marcus and Sarah sat across from each other in his study. The fire was small. Lucia had come back out from under the library couch and lay against Sarah's foot. Sarah said, "Finally, you killed people tonight." Marcus did not look away. "I did. I won't lie to you about it. Are you sorry?" He took a breath. "I'm sorry I let my family be threatened. I'm not sorry I protected you and the kids." Sarah looked at his collar. There was a thin, dark line on the fold of his shirt that the doctor had not noticed. She reached across and touched it once, then pulled her hand back. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I've been trained my whole life to protect a life. Any life. But tonight I understand why a person sometimes has to choose. Will you stay with me, Sarah?" She was quiet for a long beat. "I'll stay. But you keep your promise. As far back from the family as you can step. The children cannot grow up inside this." Marcus nodded once. "I promise." The next afternoon he went to the hospital alone. Vivienne was in a private room on the cardiothoracic floor. Her face had no color. There was a long, clear tube taped along her cheek. Her eyes turned toward the door before he was all the way through it. "Have you come to finish me?" Her voice was almost nothing. "No," he said. "I came to thank you." She blinked. Confusion lay across her face. He drew up a chair beside the bed. "You saved my life last night. I do not forget that." A small, broken sound climbed out of her chest. The tears came and she could not lift her hand to brush them away. "Marcus, I am so sorry. For all of it." He let her cry. He did not soften his face. He did not harden it either. After a while he reached into his coat pocket and took out a long white envelope. He set it on the side table next to her water cup. Through the open flap she could see the blue corner of an airline ticket. "When you're well enough to fly," he said, "go. Rome, Milan, anywhere that isn't here. I'll send you a quarterly draft. You will not contact me. You will not contact this family again. This is your second chance, Vivienne. Don't waste it." She stared at the envelope. "You're letting me go. You picked the right side at the end," Marcus said. "I'm answering it." He stood. He paused at the door without turning back, and then walked out. Frankie was waiting in the Bentley at the curb. Marcus got into the passenger seat and shut the door and closed his eyes. For the first time in 20 years of being a Don, his conscience was quiet. 2 months passed. Spring came up the slope of Bay Ridge in the way it always does in Brooklyn, not all at once, but in pieces. The snow at the foot of the iron fence shrank back and disappeared. The cherry trees along Shore Road put out a soft, hesitant pink, and then a second week later, a confident one. The wind off the harbor lost its bite by the second Sunday of April. In that same season, the Castellano name began to change shape. Marcus had stepped down. He had announced it formally to the capos in the long dining room of the gray stone house on a Tuesday morning, with coffee on the table and no firearms in the room. The family went to his cousin Antonio Castellano, A quiet man with a banker's hands and a set of principles not very different from his own. There were men in the room who did not love the decision. There was nobody in the room willing to say so out loud. Marcus himself moved sideways into the daylight side of the house, the chain of small Italian restaurants the family had owned for 40 years, the real estate firm in Bay Ridge, a new foundation he had set up with his own lawyer that did not bear his name on any letterhead. The Brooklyn Pier, the one Salvatore Romano had wanted enough to bleed for, was reorganized inside of 6 weeks. 90% of what had moved through it in the dark stopped moving. The pier became, slowly and visibly, what its license had always claimed it was a working freight terminal. Eleanor Bennett walked the length of the front parlor on her own one morning, with a polished walnut cane in her right hand, and announced she was tired of being fussed over. The home care nurse stopped coming the following week. Lily started first grade at a small private school 3 blocks from the house. She made 2 friends in her first week and a third by the end of the second. Her teacher sent home a note about her reading level. Marcus put the note on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza. Tommy collected words the way other small boys collect rocks. By the middle of April, the family had counted 50 of them. Milk was still a favorite. So was Lulu, which was what he called the cat, and which the cat tolerated. Sarah went back to St. Vincent's full-time, the hospital, having watched her hold her ground through 1 investigation and 1 act of God, gave her a charge nurse position and a raise. Marcus drove down to Manhattan in the evenings to pick her up at shift change. He waited at the curb under the same long awning where she had once stood crying with a phone in her hand. She came out to him every night. One evening in late April, he asked her to walk in the garden with him after dinner. The cherry tree at the back wall was at the height of its bloom. The petals lay on the brick path like something soft and pink that had been spilled. Sarah walked beside him with her arm in his. He stopped beside the bench. He went down on one knee. Sarah's breath caught. Marcus. He opened the small velvet box. The ring inside was simple, a thin band of white gold, a single stone at the center. The stone was turquoise, the same color as the cross. Sarah Bennett. His voice was quiet. You saved my life 3 years ago, and you didn't know. You saved my soul 2 months ago, and you did know. You will be my benefactor for as long as I live. I am not worthy of you, but I would like to spend the rest of my life trying to be. Will you marry me? She was already crying. You idiot, she whispered. I have been waiting for you to ask. He stood. They kissed under the cherry tree, and the petals came down very softly around them. Up on the second floor, 3 faces were pressed against the window of the front bedroom. Eleanor in her wheelchair, with one thin hand at the curtain, Lily on her knees on the window seat, Tommy on his sister's lap, eyes wide. Grandma! Grandma, look! Daddy is going to be a real daddy. Eleanor laughed and lifted a corner of her sleeve to her eyes. Sweetheart, she said softly. He became a real daddy the night you knocked on his door. Late that night, after the children were asleep, after the dishes were cleared and the house was quiet, Sarah and Marcus sat together on the small balcony off the upstairs library. The same coffee, the same skyline. A different season. Do you remember what Lily said? Sarah asked. The night she knocked on your door? He smiled at the lights across the harbor. I'm only asking for a glass of milk, sir. I never thought 1 glass of milk could change my whole life. I think 1 glass of milk changed mine. He looked back at the house behind them. The porch light was on. It was always on now. He thought of the man he had been 3 months ago. The man who had almost not opened the door. And he said, very quietly, into the cold spring air, thank God I opened the door that night. Dear friends who have followed the story this far, thank you for staying with us all the way to this cherry tree, all the way to this porch light. The lesson at the bottom of this story is a small one, and a stubborn one. Kindness is not measured by how much you have to give. It is measured by whether you choose to act when it actually costs you something. A glass of milk, an open door, a name remembered, a second chance offered to a person who did not earn it. These are the small currencies that change one life, and then another, and then a third, until a whole house has changed. If this story moved you, please take a moment to tap the like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a kinder story tonight. Each like and each share helps us bring more stories like this one to people who are looking for hope at the end of a long day. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Has there ever been a moment in your own life when one small act of kindness given or received quietly changed everything? Have you ever opened a door you almost didn't open, or knocked on a door you almost didn't knock on? Tell us, in your own words, from the deepest part of your heart. We read every comment, and we treasure every story you choose to share with us. Until our next video, we wish each of you good health, peaceful days, and a home with the porch light on. Take care of one another. Be the open door for somebody tonight. Goodbye for now, dear friends, and we will see you in the next story.